This is the Cereal at Midnight podcast. Hey guys, welcome back to the Cereal at Midnight podcast. My name is Heath Holland, and this is an episode unlike any that I have ever posted before here on either the audio feed or the YouTube channel. Generally, when I have conversations with people, it's about a product or it's about a creator, it's about a thing. There's some element of like, I made this thing and I want people to know about it. That's not what this is. I'm joined by Brian Krey from Alpha Video for this conversation, but he's not here to talk about Alpha Video. He's here to talk about basically a lifetime in fandom. We were talking off the air about sort of just being 80s kids. He and I are exactly the same age, and we have all these shared touchstones. You know, we both grew up with Transformers, and for me, it was super heavy into G.I. Joe, and then, you know, the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, the coming of Tim Burton's Batman, and then now into the Marvel Cinematic Universe and everything that's happening with geek culture. Now, the geeks have inherited the earth, right? But it's all built on the backs of my generation of fan who was reading the comics, and we were watching the cartoons, Spider-Man and his amazing friends and all his superpowers, super friends. And it has evolved into this massive thing. We were talking about how sometimes these movies and these shows get things right, and sometimes they don't. And we were just really comparing notes and sharing our experiences going our whole lives loving this stuff, being, you know, growing up in the 80s at a time when this stuff was everywhere and it was so cool. And this is a nerding out session is what this is. Also an airing of grievances. I'm not going to lie to you. There's a little bit of axe grinding and a lot of why did they do this when they should have done this? Because one of the things that you kind of realize as this conversation goes on is that a lot of these movies that are drawn from, you know, Iron Man, you would think, well, these are comic book characters, right? And it becomes clear that I'm not sure the people making these movies have any awareness of the comics or the comic history, because they have just whole cloth invented characters for these movies that have existed for, you know, in some cases 60, 70 years, and some cases, you know, Superman going back to the 30s. So that's what this is, and it's the longest, I think it's the longest thing I've ever posted. It's a little over 2 hours. I'm going to say this, if you are listening to this, I know the length of this episode is going to drive some people to the audio feed. If you're listening to this, you may still want to check out the video version on YouTube, because I am putting in dozens and dozens, I think there's over 50 photo references for this. So if we talk about a comic book issue, that issue is going to be on screen. You can see the number of the issue. You can see, you know, if there's panels that we reference, I try to put those panels on the screen. So there is a heavy visual element to this episode. I don't think you're going to miss too much by listening to just the audio version, but I wanted people to know that there is a heavy video component to this, should you choose to watch it that way. Super huge thanks to Brian Krey for just a really fun conversation about, again, all these shared cultural touchstones, things that my generation just holds so dear. All those things that were on the toy aisles and on the TV dial and on the comic book rack when we were kids, and that we still cherish and that we still feel very protective of now. So that's what this conversation is. Without further ado, Mr. Brian Krey, A Life in Fandom. Did you see my experience with the Transformers this past week?
Well, it's funny because my brother had really asked me if I was going to go to that. And I said, well, there's not a single theater in Philadelphia doing it.
It felt very shoddily put together.
I think it's a bad idea in the first place. I don't think More Than Meets the Eye would stand up on the big screen. I don't think anything other than the movie stand up on the big screen.
Yeah.
Maybe Call of the Primitives, but
you know where I went? I went because I wanted to support.
Oh, I would go too if it was here, regardless.
Yeah, yeah.
I suspected it was going to go the way you told me, but I still would have gone if it had been here in Philadelphia.
As an aging fan, and this may be something we want to talk about, like as a middle-aged fan, I suppose, I want to make sure that I'm supporting things that I want to see more of.
That's how, I mean, I feel that way with comics, and maybe we need a segue for this, but one of the most kind of difficult things with me with my fandom was the New 52, because so many of my favorite characters were wiped out of existence. And it seemed like, except for a small vocal minority on the internet, no one cared.
Should we tell people who are, if they don't know what the New 52 is, should we just give
Yeah,
them?
yeah, we can. The New 52, I mean, that's the name doesn't even make sense,
But
because
there were 52
there
comics.
were 52 comics, but they were referencing the fact that they had done a weekly comic in 2006 that I'd like to think was very successful, and I enjoyed it a great deal. I loved 52. It was a weekly series that was taking place in 1 year of the DC universe. But that makes sense. When I describe that to you, that makes sense. But for some reason, they did a complete reboot, basically. I don't really like using that word, but they did a
Well, so
complete,
hold on. So they did 52, which I think was really good and successful. Then
yes.
they were like, well, that worked. Let's do Countdown. And then they started at 50. What did they
I
start?
still like Countdown than the New 52. I still like Countdown more than
Okay.
stuff that came out after the New 52. And I know that's probably a controversial opinion.
DC got really hooked into this idea of like 52 issue. The number 52 became like, we're going to do a year's worth of things.
It's like an in joke that is only relevant to them. So when they did this reboot, they called it the New 52 to kind of as a callback to this weekly series
Hmm.
years ago. And but that was getting so much more exposure than the original series that it just kind of seemed like a non sequitur, I think, to most people. Because the idea was to bring in new fans, and it's like I would just call it like the new DCU or something like that, right? I wouldn't call it the new 52. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just that's such a obscure callback, I guess, even if it was successful as a comic book. But the new 52 was basically a reboot of almost the entire DC universe. Everything started over again at number one. Almost all history was wiped out. The history I'd been following and memorizing and reciting my whole life was wiped out. And a lot of characters that are my favorites didn't exist in this new DC universe because their existence was either thought to be confusing to new fans or they were considered irrelevant to 2011. And the ones that affected me most were the Wally West Flash, because I think for most people our age, Wally West is the Flash.
Yeah.
And more importantly for me, because these are my favorite characters of all time. A lot of people think Batman is my favorite character, and we can talk about why people think that. But they wiped out the Justice Society, and those are my absolute favorite comic book characters of all time because it was too confusing that the Justice League had predecessors, that they weren't the original superheroes. And so now that the New 52 has been undone, I should say, I'm very I have to support any comic with the Justice Society or Wally West, I feel, or they'll take them away again. It's kind of I feel I'm like a baby with his bottle. I'm like, if I don't buy Flash right now and I don't buy Justice Society right now, and I'd be reading them anyway. I definitely would be reading Justice Society because I have every JSA comic since the 70s.
Hmm.
That's just a fact. Those are my favorite
Wow.
characters. Um,
Does Roy Thomas know about you?
I've tried to talk to Roy many times and I've tried to explain to him the comic and we'll talk about the comic that got me into the JSA, and he always doesn't care. He's like, yeah, that was the end of my run with it. I would say, even though Roy's writing got me interested into the JSA, it's really the work of others like
Hmm.
James Robinson or Jeff
Yeah.
Johns
Yeah.
that really has kept me with the JSA more than Roy's work. And just the original, I just like the original concept of them. It has nothing to do with kind of All-Star Squadron or Infinity Inc. I think the Infinity Inkers are kind of lame, actually. And I think anything that's been done with them since the series ended and, Nuklon becoming Atom Smasher and things like that. I think that's a lot more interesting than the original series.
I'm always aware how that people don't. There are going to be people who don't know what we're talking about.
Sure,
JSA
sure.
predates the idea of the JSA is that they are an original generation of superheroes older than the Justice League, right?
Yes.
And they predate. Did they? It's like World War II era, right? But did they?
They formed it, I think the All-Star Comics, the first appearance of the Justice Society is, I think, the end of 1940. I think it's the
Okay.
fall of 1940.
I remember Jeff Johns made them sexy for me. That's when I started
Yeah,
getting.
he did. He did because they were really in shambles before that because DC editorial kept kind of trying to get rid of them and kill them off because they thought it was confusing to have uh, older First off, they didn't like the fact that they were older. They
Right.
aged in real time as opposed to kind of the characters that have to stay young forever, which is the
Yeah.
Trinity
Some
and
of them had gray
Silver.
temples. I can't
Yeah,
relate to
yeah,
a
and I have
character
that
with gray
now.
temples.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I always liked that Alan Scott wore a toupee, which they haven't referenced in a long time. But
Okay, hold on. But see, you've referenced something. You're taking us down a path. I should actually set the stage here just for. Oh, you and
sure,
I were talking behind the scenes about comics. We were like off air. We were talking about comics and how, like a decade ago, I posted something on Facebook where I was like, I'm done. I can't. I've been a lifelong comics reader, and I was like,
yeah,
these constant crossovers, the rising cost of comics. It's really driving me away. And when was the New 52? Because it was
2011,
2014.
September 2011.
So
And
it
you
was
research that. It was so traumatic for me that I'll never forget.
that must have been a huge part of what I was thinking when I was like, I don't even know I don't even know these guys anymore. Like I felt
Well,
so
would you consider yourself more a Marvel or a DC guy? Because uh, I really haven't been a big I really kind of said goodbye to Marvel about 20 years ago. But the thing was, except for when I was very young and I first started collecting, I never really was a Marvel person. Not to say I don't love the characters in a lot of runs of the individual titles, and there'll still be a Marvel book I'll pick up here and then, or I'll read a run or whatever. But I just don't. I don't consider myself. It's funny. People are always asking me like, "Oh, what's going to happen in the next movie?" And I'll be like, "I don't even. I've never even read a comic with some of the characters that are in the
wow.
movies now."
Like
Uh,
who's Captain America? I don't know.
well, Captain America was the first Marvel superhero comic I collected, and that always confuses people. I guess because I'm like this weird goth guy, and they're like, "Well, what were you like really patriotic back then, man?" Which I think is really weird because nobody's ever would say if Spider-Man was one of my favorites and the first comic I collected, nobody would say, "Did you really like spiders, man?" Or if it was Green Lantern, nobody would say, "Do you really like the color green, man?" No, it's just I don't know.
Yeah.
But then Captain America is like the Boy Scout to everybody. I mean, I think at least people kind of know who he is because the movies did a pretty good job of portraying him, and certainly Chris Evans did a great job. A lot of times, I think he did a better job than the scripts deserved.
Yeah.
But there's still this kind of feeling that Captain America is just the kind of boring, white underpants superhero or whatever.
He's everybody's dad.
Right, right.
Yeah. It's like watch your mouth, son. Watch your
Well,
language, son.
I never liked that in the movie because it just, I don't think Steve would be that bothered by swearing. I mean, I know that was a joke, that was a running gag, but
Right.
he's from the 40s and he was in World War II, so I think he would have,
We all know that nobody swore in the 1940s. They didn't
right, because
drink.
they
They
didn't
didn't
in
do any.
movies.
Yeah.
So how could it have happened in real life?
Yeah. I was always, as a kid, I was always more of a Marvel guy. I don't know. It's actually an interesting question because growing up, you and I are the same age. So, like back in the 80s, we had the Incredible Hulk cartoon, we
Mhm.
had Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends,
Yes.
and I loved that stuff. I mean, I
Yeah.
had when the Secret Wars comic hit, they did all these Secret Wars toys. And so I had
Mhm.
toys
Mhm.
for comics I hadn't even read. Like I had
Well,
the
that's what I was going to mention. I kind of came in with this knowledge of these characters from cartoons, like watching Super Friends and Spider-Man as Amazing
Right.
Friends, and I even had coloring books of these characters. And a big thing for me, and to this day, and one of the things that, if I see them, I have them around here just to cheer me up, is the Superpowers collection figures from Kenner.
Nice.
There's just something about those toys that just brought me joy, and I
You're
didn't
talking
I
about
didn't
the
know.
originals, right? The
Oh, no,
original.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I am buying the McFarlane ones, and that's kind of a struggle because I'm on the Facebook group for it, and we're always kind of trying to get McFarlane to make characters that we actually want and not like the Batman who laughs. And or Peacemaker. Nobody, who the hell
Yeah.
wants to figure a
They're really
superpower?
pushing Peacemaker.
They're
They're like,
really
we're gonna
pushing
make this a
Peacemaker. We
thing.
don't have a figure of Supergirl, Batgirl, or the character on my chest.
But Brian, everybody knows that girl characters don't sell. That people don't go see their movies, they don't read their comics, and they don't buy the toys. It's ridiculous, I know.
Yeah, no, I know, and let's face it, McFarlane isn't exactly a mental giant, so it would be you've heard the guy talk, right? So I mean, it'd be hard
Have
to.
you heard Rob Liefeld doing Todd McFarlane?
Yeah, and the sad thing is, I think Rob is probably a much smarter guy than Todd is, and so I'd rather have dinner with Rob than
Yeah.
McFarlane.
Yeah.
I think McFarlane, I would be tearing out what's left of my hair.
Okay, but Super Friends, so
Super
I
Friends,
love Super Friends
definitely.
too. So when you asked me, I love Super Friends. So when you asked me that question, I'm like, I don't, it was all of it at the same time. I guess when I started to put my own money down, I was buying more Marvel because I was really into the X-Men. I was really into, I mean, I
And
got
how
into
old were
Spider,
you, when you say?
huh?
How old were you when you started doing that? Because you said the X-Men, and there's no way for you to know them really other than just going to the comic book store. Because I mean, they were on Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, but I don't think they really made an impression on anybody from their
Yeah,
appearances on that. Like Wolverine was like, "Hey, love, want a piece of fruit, Steve?"
that's right. Why did they do that? This is so weird.
I think they
Um,
wanted to do a movie and have Mel Gibson play him, so they made him Australian. I think that was the
that's
story.
crazy.
And imagine if
Crazy.
that would have happened. That would have been a PR nightmare now.
The only comics I was buying actively in the 80s were G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe was,
Okay.
but I think
I'm
that's
in the
also
same
because
boat.
that's
That's how I started. That's how I started. But go ahead.
G.I. Joe is how you
It
started?
wasn't G.I. Joe, it was Transformers.
Okay.
And the interesting thing, okay, so the interesting thing was, uh, because I researched all this, I think in late '86 they started doing digests of the early issues of the Marvel run that were sold at supermarkets. And I don't think this lasted very long because I think Archie has some kind of weird monopoly that whenever DC and Marvel has tried to do digests, they're like, no, we're the only ones that can have comics digests in supermarkets, and they never last long. I don't think it's that people don't want digests of the Marvel and DC characters. I think Archie actually does something to crowd them off of the shelf.
Interesting. Well,
And
do you
I
remember the whole thing at Walmart where Walmart, then they weren't digest, but Walmart was doing those DC comics?
unfortunately, it was after I moved here to Philadelphia, and um, Walmart's kind of hard to get to here.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
didn't see them too much
they
unless I was
didn't last long
visiting
there either. I think they
somebody's
did it for,
parents or something.
yeah, I think they did it for a year. It didn't
Only a
last.
year. I figured it was more than that because like Bleeding Cool was making it sound like it was the thing that was going to save comics.
Well, maybe I'm just out of touch, but I don't think
No,
that,
I think you're right. I think
I
you're
don't
right.
think it kept going very long.
Yeah.
I think because a lot of like
Were you
Bendis got his Superman thing
Mhm.
collected in one, a lot of those
Yeah.
got collected in like one trade.
Yeah. I was just going to say that the new stories ended up getting reprinted in one trade, so there would
Yeah.
be more. Um, so this is kind of funny, uh, is that those digests were influential on me starting to read my two first series, regular series that I started collecting. And now one of them was the regular Transformers comic, I was reading these digests that reprinted the early issues of the Marvel run. And the first issue I picked up was issue number 35, which came out in September 1987 and had two of the gestalts, as we used to call them on All Toys Transformers, fighting. I think it was Bruticus and Defensor. They were hitting each other with trains, which is kind of funny because the guy who owns Alpha Video is obsessed with trains. And they were all they were colored in one color to show, like how, kind of lazy the coloring was back then. Like Bruticus was blue and Defensor was red. And what I want to ask you, I think one of the reasons I started reading, and this could lead to this whole decade's worth of comics collecting, I think I started reading the Transformers comic every month because I didn't think there were going to be any more new episodes, because it was September 87. So a new season should have started. And what I want to ask you, I had no idea until I started collecting Transformers bootleg tapes in the 90s at comic conventions. I had no idea the existence of the Rebirth. I had no idea that the Rebirth was on TV. Yeah. I missed it. I had no idea there was Headmasters animation. I didn't know that there were Japanese seasons.
No.
Until I read it in, I think, a toy magazine in the 90s. I think it was Collectible Toys and Values. But there's no way I could have seen that. But I could have seen the Rebirth. But I had no idea it existed for a decade. So did you see that?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
I remember...
I thought Return of Optimus Prime Part 2 was the last episode, period.
That sounds right. Yeah, I think that's right. Because we're dealing with... I mean, those cartoons, those episodes were syndicated. They came on... I don't even know when they...
It was in New York, it was like 4:30 or 5 o'clock, I think.
I don't even remember when they came. I remember I would watch it after school, but I don't remember even what time it came on because... but yeah, like it just wouldn't be there. They would just go to something else. Like there'd be a new show in that slot. And and we had, obviously we're kids, right? So your source of news was going to be somebody else at school. It was going to be like,
no, and nobody told me, oh, they're doing the Headmasters. And I mean, I knew the Headmasters existed from the commercials for the toys, and then I started reading the comics. But I had no idea that they were that three-parter existed. I thought Return of Optimus Prime was it. It made it seem like the war was over, and I figured that was just it.
Yeah.
And I think because I love the Transformers so much, I still needed my fix of the Cybertronian conflict. So that to me is really what started me with collecting comics, was that I thought the Transformers cartoon had ended. And also in that same digest, it was the third digest, and that it reprinted the classic cover with Shockwave by M.D. Bright, which is just so amazing. But he's walking by and you see graffitied on the wall, the Transformers, you see the logo, are all dead. There was an ad, I think it was drawn by Mike Zeck, even though he wasn't drawing the book at the time, for what was going on in the Captain America monthly book, which was that it was a little comics page, kind of it was symbolic of what was going on in the book, that the government had fired Steve Rogers from being Captain America because he wasn't doing their orders. They were like, well, we paid for the shield, we paid for the super soldier serum, we paid for the uniform, so we invested money in you. You should do whatever we want, and if we want you to go to Nicaragua, you should go. And he didn't want to do that, so he quit as Captain America and just leaves the shield and the costume behind. And I was just so fascinated by that as an 8-year-old kid, because I knew I had the Secret Wars Captain America action figure, and I had seen him on Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, but I was like, a superhero can get fired? That's one reason I don't attack the big two for doing these events, like when they did the Death Superman or anything, because it gets people reading, it gets people interested, and that's how it worked with me in the beginning, because that was, you could call it a gimmick, it was a stunt. but that really hooked me. And I started reading the Captain America book, and I didn't realize that the story had started 5 months earlier, but Steve had started wearing that black costume and calling himself just the Captain. And he got T'Challa made him a new vibranium shield that was silver, and then the Captain started guest starring in other books. He guest starred in Iron Man, and Iron Man was in the middle of his Armor Wars storyline, which is an amazing story that
Hmm.
they really should have done as a movie with Robert Downey Jr. And he guest starred in Thor, and Thor was going into the period where he bonded with Eric Masterson as his alter ego, who was a handicapped single dad architect. And one of my things with Thor is I think Thor absolutely has to have an alter ego, or he's just a bro, he's just a Norse bro. And I think I don't like the movies for that reason, that he doesn't have that um, human side.
Well, does
And,
that mean you don't like the Walt Simonson run?
well, that's where they got rid of it. That's so well done that
It's a
you
really
can't
great
say
run.
anything. But um, I think they took the wrong step with the movies,
Yeah.
not doing that. And my other favorite Thor run, other than the Tom DeFalco run, Friends run, was the Dan Jurgens, John Romita Jr. run, where he was bonded with this paramedic named Jake Olson that basically, because he was in dire financial straits, was dealing drugs. So I think uh, Thor needs to have that element, because I never got in the first movie. It's like he's arrogant, so Odin strips him of his powers, but he's still hunky um, Chris Hemsworth. I mean, how much of a punishment is that? But to make him have to be a flawed human, either because he's physically handicapped, or some responsibility or situation that he has to get himself out of. That to me is what's interesting about Thor. Just the Norse god angle is, because it's not a true depiction of Norse mythology anyway. It's Jack Kirby's take on it. So I don't get the Thor movies. Sorry.
Well, you've hit on something too. A lot of the Marvel movies, well, the DC, all of the comic book movies for most of the companies ignore decades and decades of continuity that's been established.
The only thing I can say, if I have a kind of weird situation where, and I thought about this recently, because somebody had asked me, uh, you know, I was dating somebody, and I was very enthusiastic, because due to the good grace of someone I only met once, but I do consider a friend, I was able to see a version of a Batman movie that, let's just say, I shouldn't. And I was very enthusiastic about seeing this, because I was kind of blown away by it. And my girlfriend had asked me, I don't mean to offend you, but I just want to ask, how often do you watch or read things Batman related? And I really thought about this seriously. And a lot of people think Batman is my favorite character when he isn't. But I realized that the reason people think that is because Batman is the only character I enjoy in other media as much as in the comics. Every other character, I feel that it doesn't capture. I like the X-Men. I like a lot of the X-Men movies, but I don't think any of them are as good as, say, the Claremont run up until Mutant Massacre or so. And I've been actually reading some of the ones after Mutant Massacre, and they're actually a lot better. Like the ones that Jim Lee drew, they're a lot better than I remember them being.
Yeah.
And but I mean, when Claremont was still writing it. Um,
Did you, sidebar, have you been watching X-Men 97?
well, I just I'm gonna be frank with you. I just ordered a bootleg Blu-ray of it off of eBay because I don't have Disney Plus and I kind of refused. I don't really do the streaming thing.
Yeah.
So I'm waiting for that. And I don't support bootlegging, folks, but look, Disney hasn't taken it down off of eBay, so
They don't seem to care. They're like,
they don't
eh.
seem to care. I was shocked at how much stuff I saw when I looked for this.
Yeah.
So
I will say that I think X-Men 97 is the best X-Men thing in years.
well
15
my
years, maybe longer.
my friend Greg, who's a huge X-Men fan, bigger than me, he said it was what we wanted the original cartoon to be because we were always very critical of that cartoon. I think because one, we were already teenagers when it was on,
Hmm.
and two, frankly, a lot of times it just wasn't very good. I mean, the animation was really poor, and it just they never seemed to have a Bible for what they were doing with the characters. The thing I always remember was that they had Jean talking about being the Phoenix before they did the Phoenix Saga, you know. And so I'm excited, and it looks like it's adapting or taking elements from a lot of my favorite stories like Life, Death, and also like issue 200 when Magneto becomes leader of the X-Men. It's funny, I'm seeing a lot of complaints about that costume, and I always loved that costume. I used to have a baby blue graffiti images t-shirt of him wearing that costume. That's
Yeah,
the
it feels
problem.
really done for with the knowledge of the comics. It's
Mhm.
doing a lot of things with the knowledge of the comics. And that's one thing that the movies I wish would DC, Marvel and DC. I'm like,
Oh,
make these
but
people
I
read the
should I
comics.
should add, I'm sorry, just because I don't want anybody to come after me with pitchforks and knives, I should add that other than Batman, the only other media stuff that I really enjoy is the first two Superman movies with Christopher Reeve.
Oh wow.
So I mean,
That's it? Like you like
I would
Batman and the first two Superman.
I would say 1966 Batman movies, the Batman animated series, and Superman 1 and 2. I would say those are the only things where I enjoy just as much as the characters, just as much as the comics. I re
Oh, okay.
I
I
really would
got you.
say, and I think sometimes in case of the Batman movies and the animated series, they came up with better takes on the characters than in the comics.
Mhm.
But as far as like, look, I used to watch Lois and Clark in Smallville sometimes, but I can't imagine ever watching them again. And I love Flash, and I've read it every month for years. And I love Green Lantern. I've read it every month for years. I can't imagine watching the TV, watching either of the TV shows with the Flash either again, or watching the Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern again.
Yeah.
I just, it just, it doesn't. I'm sorry,
It's
but
a different thing, isn't it? I mean, that's something that when as comics have, well, it's not comics, as comic book culture, comic book characters have taken over so much of our pop culture from the last, really since
Mhm.
2008. They're very different from comic books. You know,
Yeah,
you can be a Marvel fan and have never read a
and the
comic
comics, yeah,
and have no idea
yeah.
what the comic book like the okay, so like the Donald Blake aspect of Thor, right? Like you would
Mhm.
now I think he calls himself Donald Blake in the first
As a
movie.
joke, I guess
Right.
it's supposed to make people like us happy, but to me, it just makes me frustrated.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the first three superhero series that I collected were ironically, which I think is weird because I don't think anybody our age usually these are their three favorite characters, but they ended up being the first three characters in the MCU. It was Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor.
Yeah.
And I think what is missing from Captain America is the fact that he's never had a secret identity. So there was never going to be any element of him starting a new life as Steve Rogers. He was always, so they basically become celebrities, which I don't like because, Paul McCartney once said that unless you're a celebrity, you can't really understand what a celebrity's life is like, even if you're a famous person that writes about celebrities. So I think that the secret identity element is really a necessary in to liking and kind of relating to these characters. And the same thing with Iron Man is that he exposes, that sounds funny. He reveals himself as Iron Man at the end of the first movie. And what I always thought was interesting about Iron Man is that he's pretending to be his own employee. So he can be guarding a Stark plan, and the guys that work for Stark could be like, that Stark is a rich POS. And Tony's got like a single tear going down his cheek beneath the helmet because they think he's just Stark's bodyguard. And I just
like undercover boss.
Yeah, it is undercover boss. It's absolutely that. I think there's so many things that are in comics that become, and people are like, well, that's dumb, get rid of it. And then the concept becomes popular somehow later on, kind of like them getting, even though I love Wally West, they got rid of Barry Allen, and then like he's a CSI. CSI shows become really popular. Oh crap, we killed the Flash. That's a CSI.
It's just interesting, and I don't want us to. What I don't want from this conversation is for people who don't read comics to think that we are picking on them or that we're being hipsters who are like, well, if you haven't read the comics, you don't know anything about these characters. But there is a purity.
I get a lot of that. Let me tell you, it's funny. It's almost like reverse thing. I used to be. I would get picked on for collecting comics. It's like I still get picked on for collecting comics because I know more about it than the people watching the movies, and I'm not really interested in the movies. So it's like they feel insecure. And the thing is, they shouldn't, because first off, everybody should just like what they like unless it's hurting somebody or, like Elvis said. But there's no, if they just want to watch the movies, that's fine. But they are very different characters in a lot.
It's very different, and it's hard to have these conversations.
A lot more superficial, I would say.
Yes, it's hard to have these conversations and to have been a geek at the time that we were geeks and to have paid the price for that. It's hard to separate, for me, my love of this thing and my knowledge of this thing, and then like, okay, well, now everybody knows about this stuff, but they don't have the love of it. I always think there's this one crystallized example that I can think of, because there's no cost to it now. And it's not that there even needs to be a cost to it, but we paid a cost. Like we did, whether there needs to be or not, we paid this cost. I was working at this place, and this guy came in wearing I can't remember if it was an Iron Man shirt or if it was a Batman shirt. But I said, oh, cool shirt, man. Do you like that character? And he said, well, if it was an Iron Man shirt, he said, it's no Batman. He's no Batman. And if it was a Batman shirt, he said, it's no Iron Man. I just remember it was those two characters. It was Batman and Iron Man. And he was like, I'm wearing this thing, but it's no this other thing. And I was like, why are you wearing the shirt? I didn't say that. I was just like, oh, okay. But like, I'm thinking like, if you don't like it, why are you wearing it? Like, we paid a cost for this. If we wore an Iron Man shirt, there was a social cost to it. And again, I'm not saying that nobody has to pay a social cost.
I think there's that element. I think for years, certainly with me liking Bowie, for instance, I liked the fact that it made people angry, Yeah. It was like a kind of secret that I got what his lyrics and his music really were, because most people just know Let's Dance or whatever. Or astonishingly amount of people our age only know him for Labyrinth, which I don't really think is that great of a movie, folks. Sorry.
If you saw it when you were 6 or 8.
And I didn't. That's the funny thing. And it came out like the same month as Transformers the movie. And I saw that. But I had no interest in Labyrinth,
So I didn't see. No, I did. So that Thor. What was the last Thor movie? It was called
Love and Thunder. I didn't see it either.
I call it Thor Guns N' Roses because there's a lot of Guns N' Roses in that movie,
which I don't understand because
it makes no sense.
Exactly.
I think Taika Waititi. I don't even know that he's read these comics. I don't even know if he's ever read Thor comic.
He's been very dismissive in interviews of any of that kind of stuff.
Yes, and I'm like, shouldn't the person who's helming your comic book project have at least some sense of
You
uh
know, that
awareness.
tortures me because that question tortures me because then somebody can throw back on me, well, you're obsessed with the Tim Burton Batman movies, and he's very adamant that he doesn't
Yeah.
like comics, never read comics.
Which is
Uh,
crazy, right? Because you would think that he would be very steeped in it.
well, he says he's dyslexic. I don't know. I don't know if that's true. But then
Yeah.
again, I have dyslexic friends who read comics, so you know. Um, but at the same time, I love Batman Returns. Uh, I would say that's my favorite, maybe my favorite movie of all time. I only have this because somebody wanted to read it, so I pulled it out. But I wrote my undergraduate thesis on Batman Returns. Um, and I absolutely, and I'd love to turn that into a BFI book, by the way. That's something. If they hired me to do that or gave me a budget to do that, I would love to do that because I think there should be a BFI book on that. And I mean, there are ones on the Star Wars movies now, so they don't have a genre hang up anymore. They're ones on New Hope and Empire.
How many pages is that?
How many? Oh, well, it's nowhere near long enough for a BFI book. It's only
You'd have to flesh
13
it out.
pages. And here I got the Back to the Future. How many pages is that? That's
A couple hundred probably.
113.
Okay.
Uh, I'd really have to expand it.
Yeah.
But you know, like I love those versions of Penguin and Catwoman, and I think they're a million times better than they've ever been in the comics. And I always wanted to see them bring those versions of them into the comics, which I realize now through for just getting older and learning about things, they actually can't do that because the Screenwriting Guild gets it's such a better deal than comic book writers have.
Yeah.
That's why they couldn't make Zod like he is in the Terrence Stamp version for years. They had to, I think, work it out with Mario Puzo's estate. They couldn't use Ursa and Non, and so
Interesting.
yeah, yeah.
Here,
So
okay.
I can't say that everybody should read the comics because Tim Burton didn't.
Yeah.
And I love Batman Returns. I mean, the original movie. I think I agree with Burton himself that it was more about the cultural phenomenon than it is really a great movie. It was more about like the Batman Converse high top sneakers and people shaving the bat symbol into the back of their head than it is really a great movie. But I think Batman Returns. I can tell you what my three favorite Batman movies are.
End call right now.
What's that?
I said end call right
Oh,
now.
you love 89.
I really do love
You
the
love
Batman
89.
89.
Okay. All right.
But
Do you
listen,
think it holds up as a movie? You don't think
oh,
it's just nostalgia?
I, it's impossible to say. There's no way that I can objectively answer that, but I watch it fairly regularly, and it's very set bound. It's very restricted by
Well,
sets.
so is Returns. I don't think that's a
Yes.
criticism.
Um,
I don't think that's not something that bothers me.
and it's got some spots in it that's, it's got some problems, but
I
I
mean, my
think
big problems with it are Robert Wool and Kim Basinger. I think the characters are terrible, and I think they're terrible in it. And
Robert Wool, yes. I'm not sure about Kim Basinger. I'd have to think about that. I mean, she's not a very good reporter, honestly.
I think
Um,
Sean Young would have been a lot better. And I don't know if you saw the Vice series that was just on about
I
the
didn't, but I know that story.
it's yeah, well, it's very good, and I think Sean Young would have been a lot better.
Yeah.
Now the funny thing is, I'm going to see it next because they're doing it here in Philly as Batman in concert. So I'm planning on going to that. So I'm kind of going to have to. I'm going to watch it again and see what I think of it. And supposedly it's a little different because it's a different audio mix because the music is taken out. So there's supposedly some different dialogue. So I have to see it for that.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, I want to hear more about how you got into comics. You said for you it was G.I. Joe, for me it was Transformers. But then you said you started reading X-Men And like I said, you could only get into X-Men in the 80s from really from the comic book store because they were on Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends a couple times, and there was a Wolverine Secret Wars figure, but there was no video game or cartoon or action figure line yet, you know?
Right. Yeah, I think I was not reading X-Men in the 80s at all. I think my gateway to X-Men was honestly the animated series, or maybe
Oh, okay.
I mean I actually really like that animated series and I see its flaws, but
Okay.
it made a ton of kids
Yeah, no,
actually
I
watching
appreciate
X-Men.
that. Any stuff that got people into it, uh, I respect. I mean, I'm critical of some of even the early Batman animated stuff because some of the early episodes were truly bad. Like I've got Batman in my basement and the
Yeah.
Dwellers and
I was gonna be like, which one? And then you're like,
well, and I
oh,
always thought they did Catwoman really badly. I thought they just for a show that did so many of the villains either justice or made them even better than they ever were in the comics. I thought the Catwoman episodes were just really kind of shallow, and they saddled her with that animal rights activist motivation, which I thought was
yeah.
really one-dimensional. It was
But
like
see,
Captain Planet episodes. It was like, they
yeah.
had an early story editor that wanted them, they wanted Bruce to have a recycling can in the Batcave and stuff like that. And that influence before Alan Burnett and Paul Dini came on, those episodes, I was just kind of like, maybe I should be watching Darkwing Duck. I was looking forward to this.
I did like Darkwing Duck too, by the way.
Well,
I
yeah, so did I.
yeah,
But those early Batman episodes, I was like, maybe I should go back to watching
yeah.
Darkwing Duck because it was
Suck
on at the
gas,
same time.
evildoer.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know which came first, honestly. I do remember reading the Jim Lee when Chris Claremont comes back to the X-Men and Jim Lee is illustrating it. Remember that
You mean the
relaunch?
the Adjectiveless X-Men series,
Yes,
which
I
I
was.
think the first issue of that is still the best-selling American comic book of all time.
Is it? I didn't know that.
I think so. I think so. Well, there's certainly a lot of them in dollar bins, so
Yeah, that's
I
true. Yeah.
think probably it is.
I'm sure it bought Jim Lee a house. Um, I love the X-Men. I mean, for all through the 90s, I was reading X-Men, I was reading X-Force, actually, which I think I liked more than X-Men at one point
Okay.
for years. I was reading Batman, of course. I was reading
Now, when did you
Superman.
start reading Batman?
I started reading Batman probably after the movie because our comic book
Okay.
store was doing a promotion where if you mentioned that you saw the commercial. So in my market, they on Saturday they would show it was called the Breakfast Club. It came on at 11 a.m. I think, and they would show like a teenage themed movie with teenagers
Okay.
as the hosts, right? So it
Like
was like,
local celebrities? Are they
yes,
really?
yes,
Okay.
these are people that you might have known from your own high school.
I
And they
love
were
that.
on
That
the
should be a
television.
show. We should pitch that as a show. That sounds
Yeah.
like that's
So they show like they'd be like, today's the Lost Boys, right? And it
right.
was people, it was the like 17-year-olds that were watching the Lost Boys. And they would show a commercial from my local comic book store in that during that block. And if you mentioned the commercial at the store, you got a free Batman comic. And so I would do that, and I did it more than once. I guess nobody cared, but like, yeah, like I,
No,
but
wait, it was a comic store, or was it like a okay?
yes, it was a
It
dedicated. It was
wasn't a
Sincere
supermarket.
Comics.
That's something that kids. But that's what
Kids
something
these
young
days.
people wouldn't even understand, like getting comics at a supermarket,
Yeah, yeah.
which and they were always in horrible shape because people have been reading them.
They were. But I love that too because back then I didn't care, right? Like Walmart had. This was before the Walmart Supercenter. Our Walmart, our little country Walmart, had
Yeah.
the magazine rack, and they had a comic book. It wasn't a spinner rack. It was like hanging on a thing,
Hmm.
and they were all bent from where people had pulled them down to see what was behind them, right? But if they stayed on the shelf too long, if they stayed on that rack too long, they would move them to the toy section. There was another comic rack in the toy section, and they would mark them down, and they would put stickers on them they'd have like a discounted price sticker, but they'd be like $1 or something like that. So I
Yeah.
would always look at the new stuff, and then I go to the toy section and look at the markdown comics, and they were always beat up, but they were like they might have been less than $1 because a lot of that cover price was $1 around there. So,
Yeah.
but I,
When I started, it was 75 cents, I would say.
yeah, yeah. Um, so that's how I get into Batman. That's I love I was there for Superman for the whole death of Superman era, but really what I
Yeah.
look back on now is I'm like, well, I love what John Byrne did with that character, making
Mhm.
him so rooted. Like I love the John Byrne Superman.
Yes,
Um,
for me, it was a little different because I was specifically kind of a Marvel guy. I
mhm.
went from Cap to Iron Man to Thor. I also started reading Spider-Man, of course, because the new Captain America, John Walker, guest starred in Spectacular Spider-Man, which Jerry Conway and Sal Buscema were doing at the time. But I had a hard time with getting into DC, even though I grew up with watching Super Friends, and I loved those Superpowers action figures because they had just done the Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was kind of like the New 52, but less so. They kept more some continuity and backstories were changed,
They
but they
cleaned it
kept
up. They
yeah,
let him
they
clean it
cleaned it
up.
up. They didn't change Superman's costume, but
Right.
the character still in many ways looked the same, but it was very different than what I knew from cartoons or say the Christopher Reeve movies. Like I had read the first issue of Superman I read was I think it was 21 of the John Byrne series, which was the beginning of the notorious story that every bro on the internet loves to quote, where he kills Zod, and that's the justification for Henry Cavill killing his Zod, even though it's a completely different story than what Zack Snyder did. Lex Luthor was kind of like the kingpin instead of being a guy in a purple and green costume with a collar,
Yeah.
and his Byrne's Supergirl was like a alien protoplasm from another dimension
Yeah.
as opposed to Superman's cousin. So that
Right.
was really off-putting for me. So I actually didn't read Superman after that because that was so kind of different to me. But I did try reading an issue of Batman a few months later, and that was issue 425. And I got into this a lot more because even though Jason Todd was Robin, not Dick Grayson, they still kind of looked like the Batman and Robin I knew from cartoons or action figures. And the interesting thing about that, and also I should mention that Batman does kill in that issue. The story is about Commissioner Gordon being kidnapped uh, by some, I guess, international terrorists, and he's held hostage in a used car lot, and there's these guys with machine guns that are guarding Gordon, and there's a giant stack of junked cars, and Batman's like, I can afford to get a little creative here. And he just kicks over the stack of used cars onto the guy. There's no way that didn't kill the guy. That would, I mean,
Yeah.
so when Tim
Yeah.
Burton showed Batman kind of not caring if he caused people, I didn't think about it. I didn't think about it until years later because I think that was Jim Starlin. It was definitely Jim Starlin. And he didn't care if Batman was kind of careless with killing criminals. So but I bought that, I just happened to buy that issue. And the ad for the next one was the beginning of The Death in the Family, which was the notorious story
Mhm.
where Jason Todd was killed by the Joker, and we were able to vote with our phones, which were not our mobile phones,
Right.
whether or not Robin would live or die. And that was the beginning of collecting Batman for me. And it's a coincidence that it happened to be an issue. It was a year before the first movie. And I think I just picked it up because I wanted to branch out into the DC characters. And I had trouble with Superman because what Byrne had done with Superman was so different than what I knew from movies, TV, and coloring books and
Right.
birthday party napkins and everything. It was just so different that it was off-putting. And Batman was still kind of same, even though it was a different Robin. And then to just go into, again, just like seeing that ad where Captain America got fired, the fact that then the Joker could kill Robin, even if it was not Dick Grayson, even if it was not Burt Ward, that kind of blew my mind.
With
So
a
that's
crowbar, wasn't it?
it
Didn't he
was
kill
a
him with
he
a?
bashed him with a crowbar, and then he left him in a building that exploded.
Yeah.
Talk about insult to injury. I mean, beating him with a crowbar was enough, but then blowing him up too.
Okay, so hold on. So let me ask you this, because this is
Yeah,
one of my problems. So this is one of the things that I struggle with as an adult comic book fan, is that
sure.
that's a very meaningful story in the Batman mythos, right? That for a long, that Tim Drake Robin grows up in the
Yeah,
shadow
and that
of,
was great to follow after that. That to me, I think that was the perfect story for them to be running when the first
yep.
movie, because so many young people started reading the comic, and they had a kind of a window audience identification character. You have a new Robin coming in who's training and getting to know Bruce. At the same time, all these young people are starting to read the comics. And I've read many times that the only times that that the movies or TV really influenced the sales of the comics were twice. People always think that the movies and the TV shows are going to lead people to comics, but it's only happened twice, supposedly. The Batman 66 show and the Batman 89 movie. That supposedly I've read that that's the only time that happened. So I thought the Tim Drake becoming Robin story was perfect, whether or not they intended it or not. That
Yeah.
was perfect for people coming in to read Batman.
So years go by, and somebody goes, "Let's bring back Jason Todd." And this is the thing. It's like this idea of like now we've got the Red Hood, who's been around for longer than Jason Todd was ever.
Yeah.
He might have been around. He might have been around
Jason was
longer.
Robin for 5 years. So yeah, Jason's been
I'm
alive.
wondering if he's been back longer than he was gone now. If he's been back longer than he was dead,
What
because
was
I'm
it,
guessing that was like
88
2000,
to, I want to say 2004. He
somewhere
died.
around there.
I
Yeah.
think Hush was 2003, 2004, which is really where they brought him back.
So
And
he
I guess
has
under the
been.
Red Hood was 2005. Definitely
So that
2005.
was almost 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, he has been I guess back longer than he was dead. And also he's been back longer than he was originally Robin, which was only 5 years.
So there's that. Then there's the thing with Bucky in the Captain America comics, in which they bring back
Yeah.
Bucky as the
Well, that
Winter
bothered me
Soldier,
too.
which I know a lot of people love,
Yeah.
and it's a good
I
story.
didn't
Listen,
particularly love it
the
actually.
Winter Soldier, well, the Winter Soldier in execution and everything, it's an interesting story. It's a story for Captain America that we hadn't had before.
Sure.
It fits in with the times of like the second Cold War era that we're living through, or probably still living through. Um, in which the idea that well, your enemy is really someone that you trust, someone that's this whole thing. There's a lot of subtext to that story that I think came out of the war on terror, really, the whole thing with
Sure.
bin Laden and all that stuff, which we don't need to talk about. But this is around the point when I'm starting to get fatigued, and I'm starting to say, I think maybe all the stories have been told now. I think maybe they have done what they and you can
Yeah.
never tell all the stories, right? I'm being a little bit tongue in cheek, but I really felt like it started to have
Well,
diminished returns
sometimes it's
for me.
about retelling certain stories or doing stories again with maybe more depth or characterization, but at the same time, they're still retelling the story.
Yeah, it just it felt like not carving out new territory. But at this point in time, I'm like 30, right? I'm like, am I aging out of this? Because one of the ideas for this conversation is you're still collecting comics
Mhm.
weekly. You're still in your comic shop weekly. I
It's
walked
one of the
away.
things that I look forward to.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I'm single, you're married, you have a kid.
Yeah.
Maybe it wouldn't be so important to me. I don't know.
Well,
It could be not, or it could be. I either feel it wouldn't, I wouldn't be, or I'd be exactly the same. I can't decide.
Who knows? There's no
You
who
don't know
knows,
until you're in that situation.
right? Um, I do know. So where we're gonna go, where we're taking this, the end goal here is that you're still reading comic. You go to the comic book store every week. I still
Yeah.
read comics every single day, but I'm not concerned with keeping current on just about anything other than the Energon universe, which is my
Okay.
current thing right
Okay.
now. But
Yeah.
and I'm trying to figure out why that is, and I think I just felt the
I
weight
think
of
it's
it.
just good. I think it's just good. I think it's
It's
just well
so
done.
good.
I
It's
you
so
know,
good.
because yeah, the original Marvel series and also the Marvel UK series, which I didn't learn about until much later, of
Yep, the Simon Furman
Simon
stuff.
Furman, yeah,
Yeah.
the stories that take place in between the American issues, those are amazing. But every attempt to Dreamwave with Pat Lee, and I know a lot of people like the IDW stuff, but none of it grabbed me
Mhm.
like this recent series. And I thought it was just going to be okay. It's the story of how they came to Earth. It's the first four issues of the Marvel series. It's more than meets the eye. It's the first Bay movie. It's like how many times or Transformers Prime? How many times can we do this story of the Ark and then waking up and everything?
Yeah.
But it's the same, and this sounds like a cliche or some stoner
Same but
wisdom, but it's
different.
the same but different, man.
Yeah.
And I'm enjoying it. I'm
Yeah.
enjoying it, and I love that. I'm sure the artist is doing slightly different things with them, but they look just like the original
Mhm.
cartoon designs. And that for me always bothered me with IDW is that I don't know if they were using the current toy designs or something, but they always kind of had to fiddle with them and it just never looked right to me. It was
Well, I
always,
think coming out of I don't know if this is why or not, but I think coming out of those Michael Bay movies, there was a huge pressure to make them more like mechanical looking and more like I like the big blocky chunky G1 style
yeah,
Transformers.
yeah.
I think IDW was trying to go for something more realistic's not the right word, but something more like this ain't your daddy's
I think it was
Transformers.
more maybe Gundam Wing kind of influence,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
I just remember Rodimus is my favorite character, and I really didn't like his design. He just looked a little too Gundam to me.
Yep.
That's my main take on it. And I think even though this artist is clearly bending them in ways they never were in the original Marvel series or on the original cartoon, it's still them. It's still recognizably them. Uh, and I love that.
Yeah. Well, and it has a sense of fun too, a sense of
Yeah,
fun and a sense of unpredictability.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
and
And
this is
there's
another thing.
consequences. Yeah,
Say that again.
there's consequences.
There's consequences. Yes.
You know,
But this is something else that I think has been something that has driven me away from comics and a lot of pop culture generally is that things are so like comic books for the last 20 years or so have been so dark, right? It's like the War on Terror happened and all these comics like Marvel Secret Invasion, right? Okay, you've got Avengers disassembled and then they start rebuilding the Avengers with the new Avengers and then
that
there's
was the
this
end of Avengers for me. I had been reading it I've never gone back. As far
well,
as
it's
I'm
never been the
concerned,
same since then.
it's not the Avengers, it's Marvel's Justice League, which is not what the Avengers were. The Justice League was the best known DC characters, but the Avengers, because the Marvel universe is built differently, is the characters that could work together. The most famous Marvel characters could not work together like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman can work together. Spider-Man, Wolverine, and Cap, or whoever, the Hulk, they can't work together like that.
Yeah.
And then it's just turning it into like the all-star baseball team or whatever. And that's
Yeah.
not what the Avengers ever were. They were sure there were characters that had regular books like Cap, Iron Man, and Thor, but it wasn't based on their sales or their popularity. It was based on the realism. Well, can they really work together? And
Mhm.
I always liked the element of Spider-Man being this weird person, weird guy that nobody knew who he was. They didn't know if he was human. And now I hate that everybody knows he's dorky Peter Parker and kind of makes fun of him. And I like the idea that he was he was also antisocial, that he didn't like the other superheroes because he kind of saw them as the 1%, you know?
Yeah.
And I hate that about the whiny Mr. Stark thing. You know, you'll look at an old Marvel team up where he teams up with Iron Man and he's just like, back off, because Iron Man to him was just some armored flunky for a rich guy,
Yep. Yep.
and I hate the idea of Spider-Man just not only being not being on the outside of the Marvel superhero community, but also looking up to them. Ugh, it makes my skin crawl. It's so different than the Spider-Man I grew up with and read.
It
To
is.
turn into a fanboy.
It's well, that's the thing is like I'm trying so hard not to do like, well, in my day, but it's inevitable, right? Because when we were growing up reading these characters, there was this established, pretty consistent Marvel continuity,
Yeah.
Fantastic Four. And I know you're coming from a DC perspective, but I'm
No,
talking.
but I love the Marvel characters, and and really from 1988 to maybe 2003, I read a lot of Marvel, and there's still some Marvel books I read, and I'll read still older Marvel comics.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's what I do.
they're always with me,
Right.
but I have no interest in kind of what's going on in the current continuity. I'm sure a lot of it's good, but I
No,
don't even
it's
know.
not. Not.
Like I don't, I've never seen the Ant-Man movies. I read 15, I've read a few comics with Scott Lang,
Yeah.
but he never interested me. I mean, Hank Pym is Ant-Man or Giant Man to me. You know, I,
Right.
uh, Captain Marvel's a big deal right now. The only comics I really read with her were, when she was recovering, it became Binary and Uncanny X-Men after Rogue stole her memories. And
Yep.
then when Kurt Busiek was doing Avengers, he did a whole storyline where she became an alcoholic, which was really very involving. So the version that Brie Larson's playing is not even kind of identifiable to me as that character.
Well,
It was
that's the
very
thing.
flawed.
And even in the comics now, because the tail is wagging the dog, because even in the comics now, they are chasing what the movies have established. I don't know if it's a Disney, I assume it is. I assume that Disney has mandated that the comic books are now like this proving ground for feature films, or that they're supposed to be accessible to the movie audience. And there's a completely different thing there, right? It has no connective tissue to those great runs of the 70s and the 80s and even in the 90s. Well, I say that they brought back Ben Riley, the clone Spider, and I actually like the Ben Riley
Sure,
Spider-Man stuff.
sure.
Like even the newer stuff. I mean, they do interesting things. So
It's a lot of it's James DeMatteis, and he's one of my favorite writers. So,
there you go.
he's always quality. So,
Um, they do interesting things from time to time, like the idea. See, I've read all these runs. That's the thing is you haven't read this stuff. Like I walked away, but I've read all these runs because I just do it whenever I feel like doing it, And I do
sure.
it digitally, so I'm picking these entire run. Like I'll you,
Well,
I do.
my thing with digital is that, and I know my friend Greg has this problem too, is that it just doesn't stick with me if I read it on an iPad or whatever. And that's with prose too. There's something about reading a book or holding in my hand that I remember it better than reading it and I don't know why that is. I don't know
That's
if that's
interesting.
something wrong with me, but it just seems more ephemeral, I guess. And
Uh,
it doesn't stick with me like actually holding in my hand. And also with comics, I really do. I like that you're saying you're reading a comic every day because it doesn't stick with me as much if I read a trade of a run, I read it in one space. I really like that monthly
yeah.
doling it out.
Serialized.
Yeah, and sometimes, it doesn't stick with me if I read it all in one shot or I read it over two or three intervals.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, that's interesting. I've had people tell me that I don't have that with comics, but people do
Based
say
on
that
what you
about.
told me, you don't have a store and
Right.
maybe you had changes in your life. So I think it's great that you're doing it because you're keeping it in your life. You're keeping that enjoyment in your life, even though maybe it's not physically feasible for you to go and get a physical comic right now, but you're keeping it, you're working it into your life now and with the changes in your life. And I think I would probably do the same thing if I was faced with that situation. You
Well, and
kind
you know what I
of
love
make the best
about
of
it?
it, you know? What's that?
Yeah. What I love about it is that, and I listen, this was a long road to get here because I was the physical only guy for my whole life, you know? And when digital started to rear its head, I was like, that's not okay. Full disclosure, like I co-hosted a comic book podcast from 2007 to 2009, and
Those were
I
good
was
years of collecting
it,
for me, actually.
that was good. It was a good time. And I was pirating a lot of comics back then because I could
Sure.
not afford them. And I feel guilty about it now, but I was doing it and I would read them on my computer, right? And that's not the best way to read digital. So I
Read
think
it,
about
really, I think.
huh?
To read anything on a
No,
computer sitting at a computer
no.
screen. I like talking to you like this, but I wouldn't want to read a book like this, you know?
Right. Right. So I have a friend, James Harris, that he goes by the comic book savant. He was one of the first
I think I've heard of it.
he like the first wave of podcasting, comic book
Yeah.
podcasting back in that era.
Sure.
Um, and we're really close. We're really good friends, and he has been all digital for years and years. And I would ask him, I'd be like, okay, so you have all these digital comics, right? You bought them from Comixology or whatever, but like they go away, right? How many times do you lose stuff from your collection? He's like, I've never lost anything. And he's
Okay.
like, but then he was like, but if I did and I wanted to read it, I just buy it again.
Okay.
And that kind of
Has that
like
happened though? I know that happens with music, but has that happened with
it
comics?
doesn't happen. That's the thing, is
Okay.
it doesn't happen. Now somebody's gonna listen to this or watch this and gonna be like, actually, they're gonna find an example. It doesn't happen with a
Elf
lot of
Quest number
movies.
15, I downloaded digitally and it disappeared. They'll say something like that. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, there's gonna be somebody who knows the exact, but like this doesn't happen with movies. It doesn't happen with TV shows. Most of the time, almost all of the time, your purchases are protected. Things will get delisted. Like IDW lost the Transformers, right? They lost the rights to the Transformers. They've gone to the Robert Kirkman is it's under Image, right? Yeah.
It is Image, yeah. Image Imprint.
But so I bought all those when they were with IDW. They had this line of Transformers classics,
Yeah.
trade
Well, I have,
paperbacks.
yeah,
Okay.
I have the UK ones. Yeah.
So I bought all those digitally. And when that deal happened, I still have those in my digital collection. You just can't buy them. Like if you went to
Okay.
Comixology, they've
Okay.
just been
That's good.
delisted,
That's
right?
good. That's good.
So, but I tell you what, if they ever did disappear, I'd probably just go pirate them because I've already bought them once, right?
Right. I mean,
But
believe me,
real,
there's some stuff I've downloaded digitally, like Amazon will have sales, like the first trade, the first 20 issues of Batman and the Outsiders for $5. I'm not going to buy the $50 hardcover of
right?
Batman and the Outsiders,
Yep.
as much as I love Jim Aparo, but I will get a digital version for $5 and read it
Well,
on if I'm on a plane. I mean, I haven't been on a plane for a while, but I used to go to a lot of conventions for Alpha,
yeah.
and that was always useful to have, you know.
Well, that's the thing with comics is that through Amazon, through Comixology, they have these sales. It's just constant rotating sales. And at
Mhm.
Christmas time,
Yeah.
they didn't do it last year, but for
No, that's
most
when I
Christmas
got that
seasons,
stuff.
like Marvel Masterworks are like $1. A digital master, so we're talking about like 200 pages of comics for $1.
Yeah.
And I've got like the first 24 Avengers Masterworks and
Mhm.
Spider-Man Masterworks and like
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff. And I love reading them on an iPad because I'm holding it's backlit, right? To me it actually looks better on the iPad than it does on paper because there's no ink smearing. I don't have to worry about the light. I
Yeah.
love the reading experience of a comic book, not a book, but a comic book on an iPad.
Okay.
So I don't know. It works for me, and that has enabled me in those sales. Like I've hey, Spider-Man's on sale. The last 50
So you
books of
could
Spider-Man.
you could read like say a trade of the recent run, which I think the last run, which I actually did read, was the gentleman who writes Invincible. So you would read a trade of maybe that, but you wouldn't buy it every month digitally.
Right. But I am doing that I will do that for certain books. Like I'm doing it for the Inner John books. I'm doing it for Larry Hama's G.I. Joe.
Okay. Okay.
I'm doing it they did a was it IDW? They did the Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay.
Remember that old Dungeons and Dragons cartoon from the
Sure, of
80s?
course. I never really watched it. It must have been scheduled against something else I watched.
Well,
But
see, I wasn't allowed to watch it because Dungeons and Dragons is of the devil and it will make
oh,
you.
they believed in the Dungeons and Dragons
Oh
panic.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, all right. Wow. Okay,
But I was
that's
buying
a
those
video.
monthly.
That's a video.
I I've I
Have
did
you
a
talked
video.
about it?
There's a book called Turmoil in the Toy Box that my parents had, and it was sold to evangelicals.
Wow.
And
I usually
everything that was cool to us in the 80s, this book says was a tool of Satan to corrupt the youth. I mean, it was Transformers, it was Barbie, it was Care Bears, it was He-Man,
Care
it
Bears. Oh
was
my
Ninja
Lord.
Turtles, it was Star Wars, everything.
Which, there've been so many interpretations of Star Wars to make it work with various religions.
Well,
Yeah.
I when you read it, it's like the fundamentals of the Force are rooted in Buddhism and this idea of you know, and I'm like, and it's like that does not glorify Jesus Christ.
Right,
It
right.
distracts from the truth of our true salvation, and it confuses kids, and it makes them
Mhm.
think that anybody can go to heaven if they listen. So that actually had a bigger effect on me, making me like a super fan of these
Was
things
that
because
Jitsu? Was that?
yeah, yeah, that's the
Where's my Evelyn from?
nice. Yep. Oh, actually, I have Moss Man here too. The flocked Moss Man that I got on clearance. But it actually
He's
made me a deeper fan of that stuff.
my favorite Transformer
Yes.
character, of course.
Hold it up
A
again.
lot of people don't like him because they think he got Optimus killed. But that's actually why I like Rodimus so much because he is a screw up. And I often screw up things myself, and I get
Yeah.
intimidated by mentor figures and feel like I can't live up to them. And that's why I love Rodimus. And I actually hate that they brought Optimus back. I thought that was invalidating his arc because they had done that great episode, The Burden Hardest to Bear, right before Return of Optimus Prime, where he kind of accepts, you know, the the burden hardest to bear, which is the lead. And of course, then the next episode, Optimus comes back to life.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? And that's the thing that I was talking about earlier is that we have these moments that actually mean something, and then they immediately, well, they don't always
Yeah,
immediately, but they pull back on it and they
yeah, not. I think
invalidate.
that was the record with Rodimus Prime to
Yeah.
have him
Yeah.
accept becoming leader and then bring back Optimus. He accepts at the end of the episode, and then in Return of Optimus Prime Part One, he's like, "Why do I keep seeing you in my dreams, Optimus? Are you telling me that I wasn't as good a leader as you? I already know that." It's like you just accepted it at the end of the last episode
Yeah.
that you were whatever it
Heavy
is.
is the
The
crown. Heavy is
chosen.
the head that wears the crown.
Yeah, what is he? Is he? I know I'm confusing with Star Wars, but he's the chosen one. What is he? And what is one day an Autobot will rise from our ranks and light our darkest hour? What was there something like a chosen one that he was, or
I that sounds right. It's the whole idea that, and I don't like that either. This idea of
yeah,
the
that
heroes,
that
the
wasn't.
Joseph Campbell crap having to infiltrate every
Yeah, I
single
agree
thing.
with that. I agree with that. I also
Yeah.
think that maybe the interpretation you could make of that Optimus was wrong. He really thought it was Ultra Magnus. Maybe there wasn't a chosen one, and maybe just the fact that Hot Rod was able to figure out his way out of every situation, and the movie is what proves that he's
Hmm.
the next leader, the next Prime. And maybe Ultra Magnus was supposed to be the chosen one, and it's interesting. That's what I always liked about the character because he doesn't seem like he should be the leader, and yet he was. I like
And
that.
that's who should be the leader.
Right, right,
The person that doesn't want it and it doesn't seem like they should be. They're like
right,
that's who you want to lead you.
right. And I understand that Optimus is so iconic for so many people, and they've certainly done a lot of great stuff with him since 1986. And I think the Energon comic is doing a great job with him, actually. But there's always a part of me that felt he never should have come back.
Yeah.
And because his death was so impactful. And I thought, I just thought Rodimus was a great character.
Well, and we don't know anything about where that comic book is going, but I bet that the people writing that new comic book probably feel the same way because they're moving pieces around that we've never really had moved around before.
And they're using characters from this third season like the Scuzoid and Slozardo, and so they've obviously watched those episodes. And I think if you actually watch those episodes, you'll see that they had some pretty good stories. So hopefully it will be in the mix. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. If you did not have a comic book store, what would you do?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question. Would I do digital? Would I do now? I tried doing at one point to save money this thing. I don't know what it's called. They sponsor a podcast I listen to called Comic Geek Speak, which is very good.
Brian Deemer, Peter Rios,
Adam Murdo, my favorite, who does the Crisis tapes. Yeah. But you can order your comics but you get them at the end of the month all in a box.
DCBS.
You have to wait a whole month to read all your books.
You're talking about DCBS, Discount Comic Book Service.
Yes. Yeah.
I used them for years.
I tried doing that, and then a store opened up around the corner from me called JD Cereal Complex. A little plug there. And there's also other stores in the I'm in Manayunk, which is kind of the outskirts of Philadelphia, but there's stores in the city proper. There's Atomic City Comics and Fat Jack's Comic Script and a Brave New World. So I have a lot of opportunities. But if I didn't, if I went out to the suburbs, I don't know. Yeah,
that's incredible that you have that many stores. Wow.
I wouldn't have anything to do here otherwise. Because there's no good movie theaters, and there's no favorite bands of mine don't really come here. And if they do come, like I saw Echo and the Bunnymen on Sunday, when they come, they're drunk. So if I didn't have comic book stores here, there wouldn't be much to do in Philadelphia, I'm sorry to say.
You run up the rocky stairs, and then run back down.
I've still never done that. I've never gone to the art museum. I'm waiting for like the right person that wants to go with me.
When I'm in town, we'll go. We'll do.
All right, that should be a video though.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting though, because like comic book stores are dying. I don't
know how any of them stay open. I really don't.
There's a documentary about it. I can't remember the name. I did a video about it with James, the comic book savant. It's about the struggle of the comic book store in a time, in the modern time, because people aren't reading and they get their fix from the movies. Like, well, I get 3 Marvel movies every year and a couple of DC movies, and like I'm good. And comic book stores are falling.
It's funny, when you said that, we were talking about, how I don't really know Scott Lang, even with all my Marvel reading, and the Carol Danvers I knew was very different than the one in the movies. I don't understand this kind of change. That I was telling you how I love Batman Returns, and that's my favorite movie. It's certainly my favorite comic book movie, but it's probably my favorite movie, period. Not saying it's the best movie ever made. It's my favorite, though.
That's a good distinction to make, by the way.
Yeah. But I do think it's worthy of a BFI Film Classics volume written by Brian Krey. If BFI wants me to write that, I will.
Plug alert.
I even have the cover all laid out. If anybody wants that, the picture. I want the.
Don't give it away because people might be like.
But I want it to be her straddling him on the rooftop. When she says,
mistletoe could be
deadly if you eat it. It can be ever deadly, which is very true. But I remember comic book fans, because I've always had a lot of friends, older friends that read comics, because I would go to the comic book store and. I would want to know what they knew. I've always been trying to pick up knowledge from any mentor, whether it's in the film world or comic books. People were really upset how much Burton changed Penguin and Catwoman. Now, I thought, and I still think, those versions are better than the comic book versions. But at that time, they were both kind of characters that only appeared every so often. They were just villains. Catwoman didn't have her own series back then. They were kind of a little more one-dimensional. Certainly Catwoman was, I would say. I mean, Penguin, you could argue, is still one-dimensional because they've just turned him into a gangster, which is just as different as the Danny DeVito version.
Yeah.
But people were upset about that in 1992. But then a character okay, Penguin and Catwoman are more famous because they were on the 66 show and they had toys and all these things. They're more famous than Hawkeye. But Hawkeye has more appearances than them by a wide margin because he's not only always been in the Avengers, he's had his own series at various points. You know, you had the Matt Fraction series, and when I first started collecting, he was in every issue of Solo Avengers, which was kind of a Hawkeye book that had a Hawkeye story and then a backup story of another Avenger.
Wasn't he the leader of the West Coast Avengers?
He was leader of the West Coast Avengers. And the Hawkeye that Jeremy Renner plays is completely different than that character. But I don't see anybody complaining about the fact that they changed Hawkeye, a character that should be more important to comics fans than Penguin and Catwoman, who, as famous as they are just occasional antagonists for Batman back in 1992. Now, obviously, Catwoman has her own book and all this backstory about her being a dominatrix and all this stuff. But why doesn't it bother people that Hawkeye, a character that they should be more attached to than the Penguin, who's just a fat guy with an umbrella that fights Batman, has changed? Where did the fandom change that doesn't mean anything now that Hawkeye, who's a character, like Hawkeye has a very specific personality. He's insecure, he's jokey, he's got this relationship with Captain America where he admires him, but he can't help but to take the piss out of him. And the Jeremy Renner version doesn't have any of that. He's like a family man / cold-blooded killer. It's like a completely different character. Why doesn't that bother people now like it did in 1992 over a much less important character?
Is that rhetorical, or do you want my thoughts on it?
I want your thoughts on it.
I think it's because the movies. I think it's because the movies have replaced comic books in our culture, and not many people even know about the comic book character. They may know him from a toy in Target, but I don't know how many people from the comic book. I don't think a whole lot of people our generation are reading comics anymore. I think we're dropping like flies. I think that the comic book industry used to be a pyramid. It had a wide base, and thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were reading comics. Now I think it's in an inverted pyramid, and there's thousands and thousands of comics on the backs of just a few fans. Is what I think.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people just don't. They got out. My comic book store closed about 6 years ago, I guess. And I was talking to the guy. I think maybe he was even there for free comic book day or something. And I was like, why? What's going on? And he was like, well, the old readers are tapping out because of cost, because they can't keep up, and because it looks different than what they want to read. Right. And new readers aren't coming in.
Right.
So I think that's it. The original audience is getting out of it. The older audience is getting out of it, and the newer audience isn't reading it to begin with.
Now, of course, comic books is an art form at the end of the day. It's not just a genre. It's not just superheroes. Right. And I don't think that'll ever go away. But I think it's kind of a shame that if these superhero characters that are owned by the big two that we love so much, that they're just going to get replaced by the movie versions of them, which I think are so much kind of more shallow or less engaging than the comic book versions. Even though I guess they're more popular, I think that's why kind of it drops off, like with the Marvel stuff, because people get excited at first, but they don't have the facets that keep people reading the comics, and they get tired of it very quickly. I don't know. Do you think that's true? Do you think?
I think that's true. Well, I think it's true, but I also think that
there's a lot of like, oh, I never really liked such and such a character from the movie fans. which I think is weird. Like you wouldn't, I don't think a comic book fan would say that, but they'll say, "Oh, I never really liked Captain America. I'm glad he's gone," or I don't really like Batman or something. It's just why don't they bring in Terry McGinnis? I don't think they comic book fans would say that. It's almost like
Right.
they're kind of looking for the next. Maybe it's like the whole thing that started with like Lost, that they just want to know what's the next thing going to happen, what's the next thing going to happen, and they want to
Yeah.
outsmart whoever's writing it and get to the end.
I think it's because I mean I don't know, but I suspect it's because these movies feel disposable, and because what we were talking about earlier, there's no real cost. There's
Hmm.
no barrier of entry. It's just wallpaper. It's there and it's easily accessible and
Hmm.
it doesn't mean much. You go see it, you talk about it on Reddit or whatever, you make a TikTok video about it, and then you're done with it and you move
Yeah.
on. Now,
Yeah.
that's not everybody,
No,
but
of
I
course
think
not.
when you come from and this, I'm trying to be very careful not to be the old man shakes his fist who says in my day, but
Right.
it was different for our generation and for the generation older than us because there was a cost. You didn't just have access to it, you had to actively pursue it. And
Right.
so you're reading Captain America and then you see that character popping up in Iron Man and like it's connecting dots in a way that's very organic. It's serialized and it required action for you to seek that out.
And I wanted to read it.
You
Just
had
kind of
to
like,
make a choice. Yes.
yeah, yeah. Just kind of like we were talking about music. When I wanted to get into David Bowie, I wanted to get all of his albums. And at that time, I didn't care if what format I was buying them on. If it could have been
Right.
CD, could have been vinyl, it could have been tape. But as long as I was getting it so I'd have all of them one day and hear them. Now, of course, then I could get if I had Young Americans on tape, then I would get it later on CD because I know the CD sounds better. But right at that moment, if I saw it on tape and I could get it cheap, I'd want it because I wanted to build up this kind of knowledge of it.
Right.
And
But I don't think that exists anymore.
no, because everything's accessible, right?
Right.
In a way.
Anything you want, you get like like if anybody wants to explore David Bowie, they pop onto Spotify and it's all right
Mhm.
there. And that's great, but does
And they
it
probably
have
don't have to hear the bad songs. They don't have to hear like, Too Dizzy or his cover of Across the Universe or, uh so they'll
but
just think they'll think he'd be flawless because they
there
don't
you
have to
go.
hear the bad songs.
And that kind of proves the point too, doesn't it? Which is that
Yeah,
there's no yeah.
yeah, yeah. If there's no peaks and valleys, you don't know what's really good.
And we're out. I
The
mean
end.
that
The
is
end.
kind of that's kind of the end though. I mean, that's like I don't know. I don't know. I think about, I feel like there's a lot of things that are ending right now. And I feel like movies are kind of over. I
Hmm.
feel like comics are kind of over. Music's been over.
Right, that's
In the
true.
sense, not in the sense that they don't make new
Make
stuff, but
music.
that
People always make music, just like people will always breathe air, hopefully.
right. But it just doesn't have, I mean, like, okay, we have Taylor Swift and then we have everybody else, right?
Right,
There's
right,
no
right.
culture around that anymore. There's no movie culture anymore. Like all these things. I
Yeah.
think a cycle is coming to an end. And I don't know, that's been what we've known for our whole lives. And I think we're entering into an era where I'm not sure what it's going to look like because I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of people talking about comics. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of people talking about movies. I don't know.
I mean, I think, and maybe this is relevant because of what I do, but I do think, and I don't know how this is going to change things, but I wonder if when Superman and Batman become public domain, will that really be the end of the DC universe? Because other people will be doing or trying. I mean, I don't think they should. And I have people done it with Mickey Mouse. I don't know. Uh, but I mean, I see things about like Steamboat Willie horror movie, but is that real or is that like is
I
that
don't know, but they made that Winnie
is
the
it real
Pooh.
or is it Memorex?
Yeah. But they did that Winnie the Pooh movie, when Blood and Honey, and
Right,
now they're making
right,
another one.
right.
So,
I mean, I would love to see I would love to make a low budget golden age Batman movie, and
oh yeah.
I'll start auditioning for Catwoman now if anybody wants to send me headshots. But Uh,
Sean Young just emailed you.
I thought it was Sam Sherman, but I am Catwoman. Um, but do you remember when they did that on Tiny Toons? That was really. Do you remember? I'm sure it's on YouTube if anybody wants
Maybe.
to see it. Yeah, but that was they had her terrorizing Tim Burton, a caricature of him. Um, but I wonder if that will be these characters will lose a little value when their stories go out of copyright, or that Warner Brothers will have to change, just kind of like they tried to do with the New 52. They'll have to change the looks of Superman and Batman to look so different than the original versions that people like me will start breaking out in hives. You know,
Hmm.
I mean, it's bad enough Superman is going to have that terrible New 52 collar in the new movie. I mean, I'm hoping that the movie will be good. I don't want to be a hater, as I've been accused of being, but I don't like that collar on Superman. I don't understand why Superman needs a collar after 75 years.
That image, the image from the James Gunn Superman movie has kind of it has exposed the divide in fandom, because a lot of comics guys are like, well, this isn't what I want at all. And a lot of people who are clearly don't not reading comics and love like just the movies, they're like, this
Mm.
looks amazing. This is exactly what I want. So it's not what I want, but
Well, I mean, James Gunn's humor is very, to me, it's very antithetical to superhero comics.
James Gunn
Um,
is a subversive guy who he is very
yeah,
punk rock. He does not like institutions. A
right.
lot of his career has been taking down like,
I mean, he started at
subverting.
Trauma. It's
I
funny,
don't
I
think
tried to get a job at Trauma in about 2000, and I didn't get it. But I always think if I had gotten it, I'd be directing a Superman movie now.
you probably would be.
But imagine all the stuff I would have had to have gone through to get there.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I tried watching his Suicide Squad movie, and it was just all a lot of like toilet humor, literally toilet humor at the beginning of the movie that kind of made me turn it off. Not that I'm a prude, far
Right.
from it, but it's just that's not that's not it's not what I go to this stuff for, you
If
know?
you've read the John Ostrander Suicide
I
Squad
was gonna
comics,
say
there
that.
is zero connective tissue to that comic book.
That's what I thought. I thought
Yeah.
that about the original movie. And people were kind of, I went to see it and people were kind of making fun of me for seeing it. And I said, but I love the Ostrander. People don't know Ostrander, the people that were saying this, but it had nothing to do with it. It had some of the same characters and the same names, but it didn't.
Hmm.
I didn't get the intention of turning that into their equivalent of Guardians of the Galaxy. That it was a kind of a comedy, raunchy thing. Why choose Suicide Squad of all things to make into that?
Yep.
I mean, I never liked Lobo, but I think they should just do Lobo because that seems to be so much the attitude of what people want to see, you know,
Right. Yeah.
kind of Beavis and Butthead
Yep.
type of thing. I don't
Snark
mean
and
Beavis and Butthead,
irony.
but they're almost like the audience for this, you know?
Yeah. Yep. It is what it is. It's a sad time for me, honestly. Like it's
I didn't want you to get depressed from this
no, I'm
conversation.
not depressed because I can just go read like the Avengers Defenders War, or I can go read
Right,
some
right.
amazing comics from like 1986 or something like that. But
I have that in black and white on my shelf right over
nice,
here. In the
nice.
essentials books, I bought tons of those big black and white
Hmm.
books. And of course the paper quality is terrible and it's black and white, but you get a lot of old comics and there wasn't digital when those were coming out. So it was a great way to read
Right.
big chunks of material.
It was the best way. Yeah, you
Yeah,
could
it was the
read.
only way, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really. I mean, you could read like
I mean, I don't
years.
have, I should mention that people think because I have tons of long boxes and I've been collecting so long that my collection is worth a lot of money. One guy that I worked with said to me once, why don't you sell your books and move to Hollywood? Uh, and because I was recently in a relationship where money was becoming an issue, or money was a concern. I mean, it is in every relationship. I actually looked, do I have anything that's worth money? Apparently, the most valuable comic I own is the first appearance of Machine Man.
What book is that?
2001, A Space Odyssey, #8 is the first appearance of Machine Man by Jack Kirby, and that is supposedly the most. That's to me, I'm saying that as an example of how worthless my collection is. That the most valuable comic.
Well, unless you send this stuff off to get slabbed and graded, it's not worth anything anyway.
Yeah,
That's the only.
I thought that I have the first appearance of Poison Ivy, and I thought that was worth something. But I found out that the reason it's worth so much, not only is Poison Ivy a popular character, being on the Harley Quinn cartoon and all that, that issue came out at the height of 1966 Batmania, and they actually put a centerfold pinup, not of Poison Ivy, but of Batman and Robin by Carmine Infantino, and kids took that out and hung it on their walls. Now that's kind of sad to think, with the crappy paper quality and coloring back then, putting that on your wall.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why it's so valuable. And of course, my copy doesn't have the gatefold, so it's worthless. So I don't do this for it to be worth money.
Yeah.
And I actually don't have anything. Maybe I shouldn't be saying this in a public forum, but I don't have any I don't have, my collection isn't really worth anything, because I started in 1988, and yeah, I have a lot of old comics, but a lot of them are reading quality, or whatever you want to call them. They're reading copies.
Right.
And you wouldn't have been able to find the key issues. I have a lot of Batman comics from the 70s, but I don't have the Joker's Five-Way Revenge, because you never would have found that cheap,
Mm-hmm.
I think I only own one Neil Adams drawn issue, which is the last one he ever drew, because I know a lot of people think that he did Batman stories later, like Batman Odyssey and Batman versus Ra's al Ghul, but that's all a hoax. That's all a dream. Neil Adams never drew Batman again, and he certainly never tried to write him. That's an internet hoax. It's like Slender Man or something. Or
he had no opinions about Pangea.
No, that was no. Why would anybody think that? I mean, certainly not Neil Adams. I mean, it would go against science. But the only Neil Adams issue I have is that I think it's Batman 255, Moon of the Wolf, which is he fights a werewolf, which was adapted into an episode of the animated series, where the soundtrack has a lot of electric guitar, and it's like, the lightning's crashing and the werewolf's coming. It's like, so that's the only Neil Adams issue I have. God knows what condition it's in.
Well, that's the thing.
I got that after we didn't really talk about, and I know we could talk about this stuff for hours and you have to edit it, but the 90s glut was great for a lot of people I know got out of it after kind of the speculation boom busted. But was great for me, I was able to kind of pick up all these old comics cheap. Now, granted, nothing that's valuable, except for the first appearance of Machine Man. But a lot of stuff that a lot of 70s JLA issues and things I really love that aren't really worth money.
Yeah.
But I was able to pick up a lot of that stuff. Because there would still be things like on Long Island, there'd be collectible shows at malls and things like that. But so many people our age that I've talked to got out of the hobby, or I don't even like calling it a hobby because it's fandom. Hobby to me is like fishing or something, or stamp collecting, where you don't read a stamp. I mean, I guess you could read whatever words on there, but it doesn't take very long to read it.
But a lot of those people that you're talking about, were they there because of speculation, or were they there because they
but now I feel a lot of them I'm talking to, and they're back because of the movies, and they're like, well, I was into this stuff, but they something I hear over and over again is that they dropped out of it because Superman came back to life. And I guess they were hoping that the issue where he died was going to be worth all this money because he was going to stay dead forever.
That's the
And
thing.
that's so weird to me to think they wanted Superman to stay dead. And also, look, even if you're a kid or a teenager, you have to know. I mean, how would the DC universe, how would a superhero T-shirt that has the Super Friends on it, how would that even work without Superman being on it?
Yeah.
You know, you have Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, but you don't have Superman on it. You know, did they really think Superman was going to be gone forever? Or the cyborg Superman was the new Superman, and when you went to Burger King and got a kid's toy, it would be that scary skull face Superman. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, here you go, Johnny. Isn't this great? And kids crying, you know, I don't want
Who's Hank
skull-face
Henshaw?
Superman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's crazy. But see, that implies that they
You
were
met
there for the
anybody
value.
like that? Is that just me? Is that like an East Coast like hipster thing, or
I don't have a whole lot of comic book contacts anymore, so
okay?
I wouldn't even know. The people that I know that still read comics are picking up omnibuses, and
Sure.
that's like the adult fandom now. It's like, well, I bought
Right.
the omnibus, you know. I don't know how
Right.
you read it, but you know,
Hmm.
you have it. I used to have to read that stuff like you sit in a chair and read it, or you sit at a table and read it because it's impossible to read it. You can't recline, you know. It's
Yeah.
omnibuses are tough.
Yeah, I can't hold them. Yeah.
I think we did it for now. I think this is
Okay. All right.
we can think of if there's a hook to title it or something, but this is just two nerds talking about what they
A
love.
lifetime of collecting, really. Yeah.
It kind of is a lifetime of collecting.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are you working on at Alpha for Alpha Video right now? Anything you
Well,
can
like,
talk about?
yeah, the one thing that we are doing, and I know I kind of mentioned it, I think, in the first video, but I do want to talk about is that for years we were doing these bundle packs of alphas, but we were just that we were reselling when we were making the discs in the oldies warehouse. But we were just taking old alphas and shrink wrapping them and
Mhm.
putting a label on them with a UPC and calling that a box set. Um,
And people can see those in my West when I bought that whole
yeah,
Western
yeah,
collection.
yeah.
There's
And
several of those. There's huge bricks
yeah, you
of
can see
titles.
that, but it's really not, it's not a box set. It's a bunch of DVDs shrink wrapped together. And considering who in the warehouse was doing it, sometimes not very well. Um, but what we're doing now, because Allied Vaughn is doing our manufacturing, is that they are now multi-disc sets. The discs are stacked on top of each other. I mean, I'm sorry, I wish they were the what are they called? The window. What are the when you open them up and there's do I have one here? Uh Here's okay, like what would this is my essential Daffy Duck. What is this called? This kind of thing here. What is this called?
I just call it like a tray, but I
A
don't.
tray, okay.
They're gonna know. They've already commented. They're
Well,
like,
they're
well,
not
actually, that's an
trays.
amaray case with a.
They're not trays. They're just kind of stacked on top of each other like this, you know. Um, but it's still it's less space for your shelf, and also it's going to have a new cover by our staff artist Al Landron that looks very nice, and uh, they're guaranteed to play because they're made by Allied Vaughn. We're not reusing old bad discs that were made at the oldies warehouse. But what I'm excited by that we're doing with these, or I'm doing with them, because I'm coming up with the ideas, uh, I had done multiple volumes of collecting short films about various subjects. Uh, and those multiple volumes are being collected into these sets. For instance, we have out that came out April 23rd, we have How to Survive a Nuclear Holocaust, vintage Fallout films from the Cold War era. I made sure to get Fallout in the title so get the
Nice.
kids' attention. But these are these these government safety films from the 50s that are talking about what it's going to be like when there's a nuclear war and how we're going to survive. And, what's kind of hilarious about them is that they make it seem like it's not going to be a big deal at all, that you'll just go to a shelter and then the fallout will be over and you'll go back home and nobody's going to die. And we've also got now on May 28th, we have traffic safety films of the past coming out, which are basically they're films that were made to warn you about safe driving. But the thing is, they're so scary that it makes you want to never drive again. And uh, and these films, these short films, that they're kind of what led to Faces of Death in a way, creating the demand for people wanting to see accidents and things like that. And some of them have real actors in them. And to tie in with our kind of comic talk, there's one called Anatomy of an Accident, which stars David Wayne, who was a Broadway actor, but is probably best known to nerds as for playing Jervis Tetch, the Mad Hatter, on the '66 Batman show. And he dies in a car accident in this, and then he haunts his own family. So, which is really morbid. And we're
Did
also
they do it? Was it their fault?
no, it was his fault.
Why is he on? They had
He
nothing to
goes
do with it.
he actually goes through the window, and they have this zoom in on his eye, and then they do this effect of the splintering glass. It's really overly intense.
Wow.
And next month we're going to be doing both of our volumes, and these are like the things I'm proudest of in my time of Alpha Video. Of course, I had to get a Tim Burton reference into the name. We have the Strange and Unusual Christmas Films collection, which is bizarre Christmas shorts from the 1950s and 60s. And some of them are things people have seen, like uh, what is one of them? A Visit to Santa, and there's one with Santa Claus and monkeys, and is really, and I don't mean Michael Nesmith and Mickey Dolenz, I mean actual monkeys, and it's just it. I love putting these short. Some of these things have been revived by the Mystery Science Theater people and the Riff Tracks people, but some of these have never been on DVD, and they're not on YouTube. Some of them are, if people want to see them. I don't mind. They're public domain. We don't own them. Uh, but these compilations that I've put together over the last 10 years, and now they're coming out as box sets, which I think is even better value. That's what I'm most proud of doing an Alpha Video, because a lot of the movies we do, as people know, the public domain movies, they're available from other labels, and they're probably better quality. And yeah, I try to do as much as material as nobody has ever done before as possible. But nobody, as far as I know, is doing these weird short films and compiling them and putting them together. And I think they have a real nostalgic kitsch value, and they're kind of bonkers. They appeal to that psychotronic audience, and I don't think anybody's doing that stuff, and I don't think anybody's going to do that stuff now, because how can you market that? And I don't know if we marketed it that well. Steve would want me to come up with names for the compilations, like Danger in the Streets, or how, Bombs Away for the atomic bomb stuff, and people probably think, oh, is that the name of a movie I've never heard of?
Mm-hmm.
And it's no, you're getting like 10 films on a disc, 10 short films. And I just think these are really unique. And when I try to talk to you about Alpha Video, I try to emphasize what we're doing that nobody else is doing. Because yeah, we have to do a lot of things that other people are doing, just kind of keep going, that we kind of have to keep having releases. But it's the unique things that I want to talk to people about. And I don't think anybody has done these things, like the traffic safety films, or the atomic bomb films, or the strange Christmas movies. I mean, I think Kino did some stuff like that with the AV Geeks, but I don't know if it sold particularly well. And I'm not saying it sells well for us, but I don't think they continue doing that. So it's just, I think there's a lot of people that would enjoy these things, the type of people that kind of, I mean, they are it's historical. It has. I mean, this is what was literally shown to people, that we were trying to deceive people about how bad a nuclear war could be. Um, but I think there's a lot of people that enjoy uh, just kind of this kid. You know, I don't want to use kitschy, but you know, the people that like Mystery Science Theater and things like that, I think would get a real kick out of these films.
Yeah.
And some of them are just so weird and strange and funny without trying to be. And
Mhm.
I don't know if people know that we've done those, and I think a lot of people would get a kick out of them.
That sounds great. I think that there's a huge, well, I don't know
Does
if it's
that make
huge.
sense? Does it make sense?
It makes total sense. And our generation especially loves that kind of thing. We love the
Loving,
weird
laughing at the past
and
that we
even
didn't
just
have to
like,
live through.
yeah, well, just the val like this is, we have a sense of history, I think. And like this is real. That's the crazy thing about those, is like they're real and they were common and they had an impact in shaping the society
Yeah,
that saw them. And
yeah.
as we've gotten further from that, I think in light of the conversation we just had about maybe the changing society and how we expect different things from our entertainment, uh, people our age, because I don't know that it's people in their 20s. I don't we'll hear from some weirdos, I'm sure, who'll be like, it's me, and that's great. But it's like
I think
we
it's great,
love
and
that.
I think those people exist, but they're not a majority, or they're not a large
Yeah.
base.
Yeah.
I think
For
it's
the
important
people,
to listen to those voices.
if if you grew up with a television dial, I mean, just the act of discovery for some of this stuff is amazing. So I don't know, that's great. I love the way you think. I love your focus and I love your dedication to getting this
Right.
stuff out there. It's just interesting.
Well,
So,
just there's a lot of people that say, well, uh, we just rip off other people's releases. I can't say that that never happened in the past before I was with the company. Uh, Now we get everything from Sam Sherman, whether or not it's the best quality or not, I don't know. But uh, I have done things like these weird compilations of shorts, and they're from all different sources. Some of them are some 16 millimeter, some of them are from my old job, Streamline Films, transfer them myself. And, some of them, but yeah, some of them are from tape, so maybe they don't look great. But there was a real effort put in to collate them from different sources. And that's what I think is most worthwhile about the stuff I've done with Alpha Video,
yeah.
not necessarily putting out the same movie that another label has out. And but I don't know how relevant maybe that is, to the average customer, you
Well,
know.
who cares? Really, who cares?
Well,
Do we
that's
care?
kind of what makes it worthwhile, is to kind of put out this stuff that nobody else is compiling. And
I
and
think that's
once we're gone, there's nobody going to be putting out this stuff,
that's exactly right. I'm on YouTube and I know what videos are going to connect with people. I know what's going to get the clicks. And that's usually the thing I'm the least interested in.
Mhm.
And so I think I'm seeing a tremendous value in the off the beaten path stuff, the things that aren't so commercial and so marketable. That's where you really find the loyal audiences now. That's where when you can like that, and that's one of the things that people do follow the channel for, and they'll go like, I don't even want you to cover the new 4Ks. I don't care about the new 4Ks. I want you to talk about, and then like, your weird Western fetish that you've got right now, or like what, and I'll be like, okay, we're
Well, that's
like, I
not
think,
going anywhere just yet for Alpha Video, so we'll continue to have they're not weird Westerns, but
right, right. My Western fetish is weird to come at when it has. I don't
I
mind.
don't think so, because you seem to say that you watch them to relax. And I have to think that for a lot of the stuff that Alpha Video puts out, that would probably be near the top of the list of its value to a customer, because some
Well,
of it helps you fall asleep. Maybe it should be ASMR video. I don't know. Instead of
you
Alpha.
got to start an Alpha Video YouTube channel where you put these things on with all the pops and the cracks, and then you're like, and
I
you could
just mean
host
some
it.
of these shorts, like even the atomic bomb things where they're talking about, well, fallout will kill you eventually and make you lose your hair, but there's this like soft xylophone music in the background, and the narrator's voice is so soothing. How could it not put you at ease?
Maybe there really should be an Alpha Video YouTube channel where you have some of this, like
I
Alpha ASMR or something like
Yeah,
that.
I think there is something to that actually.
But the thing is, like, these are what you work on is so antithetical to where the mainstream is, and I think that that's actually
It's
really
forced to
cool.
be. It's forced to be because we're dealing with public domain stuff. So it's not an artistic choice. I wish I could say it was, but
Gotta say, like, that's right. I've
I mean, I love what I do. It's funny because a lot of people think, oh, you hate doing this, or and it's, but when I talk about things, because no, if anybody's getting rich off Alpha Video, it's not me. And when I talk about these things I put together, and I've gone all over the place to get them, or talk to crazy film collectors to get them. There's a sense of accomplishment there. And maybe I shouldn't be too proud of it, but
you should be.
there is something there, and I am glad. I mean,
Whenever we're
there.
talking about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say I have plenty of people that friends that graduated film school, and they're not doing anything with film. And it's not because they're not talented. Absolutely not. How many opportunities are out there? I mean, if I just sold my first appearance of Machine Man and went out to Hollywood, I'm sure I would be Matt Reeves would be like, I can't get the Batman Part 2 finished. Let me just who do you want in the movie, Brian? And I'd be like, well, I want Killer Moth, Dr. Double X, Catman. Can I have a few more?
Yeah, keep going. Keep going.
I can't use Polka Dot Man because James Gunn used him. Let's see who else. Calendar Man, Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. They made him dark, so he doesn't
He's
really count.
edgy now. Yeah.
Yeah, he's mainstream now. Who's another good obscure Bat villain? The Eraser would be good. I mean, imagine having that in a movie, a guy with a giant #2 pencil head in a suit fighting Robert Pattinson.
Listen, if James Gunn sees this, that's going to happen, and you're not going to get any credit for it. So you just gave away a great idea.
Well, he already took my job 25 years ago when I tried to get the job, because it was the same time Romeo and Juliet came out. So he's already screwed up my timeline once. So what's a second time?
So he's your nemesis. James Gunn is your nemesis.
He's probably I don't want to say anything because
No.
yeah, he's done some weird stuff. So I don't, and I've never seen, other than Guardians 1, and I tried to watch Suicide Squad. Never seen any of those movies. I've gone out with girls that had a VHS copy of Romeo and Juliet, but I've never actually watched it.
No.
And I've never seen Super or any of that stuff. So
I will say this: he has been
whole career.
He has been subverting. He has made a career out of subverting popular things or accepted things, and
how can he do Superman?
He's still doing it. Well, that's the
but
question.
how is that going to work? How is that going to? He's going to make an about face, and because
that's the question.
I think people really do want a movie like the first Donner movie, right? But not a remake of it like Superman Returns.
I think we all want different things.
Yeah, you think so?
I think that.
What do you want from a Superman movie?
I want Donner. I want
you
that.
Want Donner. Okay.
I want looking at the camera, smiling. I want to feel like it's going to be okay.
Yeah, that's what. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say something very unpopular right now, but I really love the quote of Henry Cavill when he said he actually liked doing the Joss Whedon reshoots of Justice League because it was finally the Superman he wanted to play, because it gives off the feeling of, and this was his words, I believe, oh, thank God Superman's here. Everything's going to be okay. And that's how it should be.
Yep.
I was scared by the Zack Snyder Superman. I do think Henry proved in those whatever you think of the Justice League, as the pros call it, I do like how Henry played him in those scenes, regardless of whether or not he had the CGI mustache thing. But I like the, whatever he says. He's like, some people say I'm a fan of truth and justice or whatever he says, and then he hits Steppenwolf. It was nice to see him finally playing kind of, because people say that's the Christopher Reeve Superman. But I don't think it's the Christopher Reeve Superman.
That's
It's
just
Superman. It's just Superman.
Yep.
You know?
I think that's a good place to leave this. Brian,
okay.
Thank you, man.
All right.
Let's
Heath,
make this,
so
let's have a regular conversation. Let's do this.
I would
like
love to
once
do
a
that.
month.
I would love to do that. I have plenty of ideas, and whatever ideas you have, just, I would love for you to challenge me, because that's where I thrive, is being challenged. Because as you know, I have to find the best and the weirdest stuff, so, or the most unlikely stuff. So I'd be happy if you came up with a topic,
Okay. Wait, where do you want people to follow? We know oldies.com. Where do you want them to follow you? Anywhere you want them to
Well,
come check you out?
I'm not really a social media person, but we had this bro guy come into oldies.com years ago that kind of was like gonna make us this big company, and they put him in charge of the Facebook page, but of course he didn't end up doing what he said he was going to do, so he got let go, and that meant I had to be in charge of the Alpha Video Facebook page when I don't even want to be on Facebook, period. But if somebody wants to contact me about anything regarding Alpha Video, they can through the Alpha Video page, because I was saddled with it, because the person who said he was going to turn it into a top Facebook page wasn't really interested in doing that.
Yeah. Let's do this. Let's solicit. I would like to hear from the viewers and know what you guys would like us to talk about in a future conversation.
Yeah.
No, not to harass us.
No. Well, I was worried because people are always emailing me like, can't you guys put out Sea Hunt? And it's like, it's not public domain. I can't do anything, and sometimes people will say, well, don't you guys put out gray market stuff? And no, we don't.
Yeah, no, don't do that. Don't be that guy. But if you want to hear us tackle a topic in a future video,
that I would enjoy.
Let's do it. And you can comment on the video. You can, you guys know the links are in the description of every single episode. So stay in contact with us. Let us know what comic books you love. Are you still reading comic books? Have you distanced it? Have you left it and come back to it? Like, I would really like to know more about the audience for this channel, what your connection is with comics and what your relationship is with it as an adult. Because if you're listening to this, you're probably an adult. So let's always continue the conversation. Brian, thank you so much.
Do you think BFI should let me write a book on Batman Returns?
Yep. BFI, contact us. All right, that's good.
How do you get all next time? All right, thank you.
We will catch you later.
Okay, all right.
And we're out.
Okay.